Hi. In the previous video, we looked at pragmatics, the pragmatic layer of meaning. We saw that some sentences seem to change something about the world. We cannot really say they're true or false, but rather they do something. For example, when I'm in a wedding and I say, I do, you cannot say that's true or false, but I've changed something about the world. Now I'm a married man. We've also seen that all sentences in the end seem to have such a pragmatic meaning. Even if I'm saying a sentence which is clearly true or false, I have a meaning with that. I want to inform you about that particular fact. As a matter of fact, even if I omit certain things, if I don't say them, that can have a meaning. Remember, there was an example about a professor who wrote a letter for her student and omitted details, and that seemed to be meaningful. And we've discussed how Paul Grice, a British philosopher, wrote a maxim which describes this kind of phenomenon. Now I'm going to discuss this more with my students, Marten and Inge.
I was wondering, firstly, how this true, false, or changing the world works with sentences other than declarative sentences. So you gave the example of the letter that the professor wrote and what you do in a wedding, but both of those things are statements. Mm-hmm. And I wondered about questions. How does that work? Does that work in the same way?
Yeah, so what about a question? So what about, I don't know, who is coming for dinner tonight? Right, so what does it mean? Does it have a semantics, you think?
I don't know. I mean, you can't say it's not true or false.
Right.
You cannot say who's coming for dinner. No.
Right. No, you can't say. So somebody asks you who's coming for dinner tonight. You cannot say that's false.
Yeah.
So that it's not immediately obvious that that has a semantic meaning in that sense. But actually, to some extent, it does, because there's still all the meaning, all the semantic meaning connected to somebody coming for dinner tonight. Right? So, to some extent, you could say that the semantics of this sentence is indeed something like somebody's coming for dinner tonight. But it has a very strong, heavy, pragmatic layer on top of it. A pragmatic layer which says, I want you to tell me who this somebody is.
Yes, and then also there is the point that, like you said, I want you to tell me who that someone is, and you specifically ask me, so you already think that I know who that somebody is.
Yeah, right. So this sounds already complicated enough for it to be real pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I want you to think that I want it, etc. So this back and forth, that's a clear indication of pragmatics. And you could say basically every question seems to have that kind of pragmatics. However, of course, you can also use questions in different kinds of ways. I mean, I can say, I am coming for dinner tonight, right? Yeah. And then that has the form of a question, but I'm actually not asking you for any kind of information. So we can add extra layers of pragmatic meaning on top of any of these questions as well.
And so that is a question, and we had declarative sentence, but then there's also, as the third option, an order in which I say, go away, or bring me a coffee. And then I think clearly you change the world again, but it's not a true or false statement. So does it work in the same way as questions?
Yeah, I think so. So indeed, so if you say, go away, again, I tell you, go away. You can't say, that's false, right? So, or that's true. So, but again, there is some kind of semantic meaning, because somebody going away has some kind of semantic meaning. And that's the meaning which, the semantic meaning, which I would say this sentence typically has. So it means something like somebody is going away. And the pragmatics of that typically is, I want you to be that somebody. Or more generally, I want you to make sure that that sentence becomes true.
for you, for me.
It's
Yeah,
all, and
yeah.
the easiest is that you go away.
Yeah, okay. Well,
Sorry, Martin.
no, that's okay.
Okay, well, I've been thinking about another question because I was wondering about these maxims from Paul Grice. And I was thinking, okay, so there's this maxim about quantity, and I've never heard of it until the previous video. And I was wondering, how is it possible that I still feel like I'm communicating successfully, even though I've never heard of this rule?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So how can you follow a rule which you don't really know about or didn't know about so far? Or do you become a better communicator because you are a linguist? I don't think that is necessarily true. But it is, I think you have to think about this like natural laws, right? So you also don't know about the law of gravity, and still you fall. So if you step off, the stairs, you still fall down. And that's not, you can say, that's funny because I've never read any Newton. How can I do that? So this was Grice's main goal, was to describe the world as it really is.
So it's not a rule, really. It's a description of some kind of pattern that he's...
Yeah, well, yes, I guess so. Well, you could say, law, the word law is also ambiguous in this sense. So there's a law, like in law studies, they study laws which you have to follow. But you can break them, but you have to follow them, otherwise you get punished.
Yeah.
But in physics, they study natural laws, which you just cannot break. And interestingly, so Grice's maxim is more like the second type. So it's something you cannot escape. You cannot get out of it. Our professor who wrote this letter, she gave less information than was required, but you cannot say, okay, but that's breaking Grice's law, because actually automatically you interpret it as if it is enough information. So it means, by writing this letter, she's trying to convey to us that there's just not more information than just this little bit, which there is. Although I have to admit that because people can do everything, right? So we linguists, we have to deal with people, and they can always decide to break a law willingly. That's my other example. Remember the example of the spouse who said, I've eaten half of the apple pie. So that was mean of this spouse, right? So, and if the spouse does it too often, this kind of thing, then you start feeling you can no longer communicate together.
I see, yeah.
In this video, we discussed a little bit more the distinction between semantics and pragmatics. And in particular, we have seen that really every sentence in human language seems to have both the semantics and the pragmatics. Even sentences which are not clear declaratives, which don't seem to be clearly true or false, like questions or orders, still have a semantics as well as a pragmatics. We just have to dig a little bit deeper. We've also seen that the rules we're talking about here, like Grice's maxims, are not rules like in an ordinary sense. They're not rules like stop when you see a red traffic light. But they're also not completely like natural laws, because we're humans and we can decide to break them. Except that when we do so, communication completely breaks down, and we never expect that. We never expect that other people will break those laws. In the next video, we're going to look more into semantics again. And I'm going to invite you to study the semantics of color terms for our informants.